Welcome back. It's good to be here with you again, continuing this quiet conversation.
Yes, returning to the path.
As you know, we often look for those lessons that are, well, that are hidden in plain sight, usually in the last place we'd think to search.
And today, that place is particularly unexpected.
It is. We're turning our attention not outward, not towards the grand political or economic systems we usually discuss, but inward.
Inward to a moment when the line between what we call artificial and what is deeply, profoundly real, it just dissolved.
And the most surprising part, I think, is how it dissolved. It wasn't through some great technological leap or, a philosophical breakthrough.
No, it was through the simplest mechanism there is. Human behavior. Unscripted, raw human behavior under pressure.
It's a profound irony, isn't it?
It is that sometimes we have to look at the places we define as fantasy or unreal just to see ourselves with the most painful clarity.
So our focus today is an incident from the autumn of 2005. It happened inside the vast digital world of World of Warcraft.
An event that students of Crisis and Contagion now know as the Corrupted Blood Incident, or, more simply, the Digital Plague.
Okay, let's unpack this with the depth it really deserves. Because the context is a game, yes, but the structure of the failure, it holds lessons for almost any system.
It began as a technical failure. At its heart, it was just a slip in the code.
A slip with immense consequences, though.
Oh, absolutely. It was essentially an exploit, or rather a game mechanic that went rogue. This thing, Corrupted Blood, it was a debuff.
A negative status effect, for those unfamiliar, something that harms your character temporarily.
Exactly. And it was applied by the final boss in a very specific high-level dungeon. The whole point was to challenge the most powerful players. The key element here, the thing that changed everything, was that it was a potent damage over time effect.
Meaning it slowly drains your health.
Drains it significantly.
Right.
And critically, it was communicable. It could spread from player to player.
So it's a virus, a digital virus.
Precisely. And not just between players. It could spread to non-player characters, like pets and animal companions that players had with them.
And there's the detail that breaks the whole system, right? The technical detail becomes a social one.
Yeah.
This debuff was designed for, level 60 characters? The highest level at the time?
Yes. Characters at the level cap, they could survive the health drain for a while. Long enough for a healer to maybe do something about it.
But the pets.
The pets. The code, the system, allowed these pets to carry the debuff with them out of that sealed-off dungeon.
And into the open world.
Into the main capital cities, places like Ironforge and Orgrimmar, the social hubs. And once it was released into the general population, the effect scaled based on the victim's health.
Which means for a low-level character, a beginner just starting out at level 5 or 10.
It was instantaneous, catastrophic. Their health bars would drain faster than the human eye could even process. They would just collapse instantly.
I can't imagine the chaos, the sense of security just dissolving in a moment.
It was palpable, even though it was digital. You log into the capital city, the one place you expect to be safe, a place for commerce and community.
And suddenly, characters are just dropping dead all around you in the middle of the trade district. The game's skeletons piling up on the cobblestones.
And the healers, the very people whose entire role is built around preventing this, they were horrified. They realized their most powerful spells were completely useless against this kind of exponential spread.
That is the moment of true systemic failure.
It is. The foundational rules that govern everything, that cities are safe, that your level matters, that the systems are reliable, they just disappeared.
So our mission today, then, is to move past the glitch in the code. We need to focus on what we do, what human beings do when systems fail faster than meaning can catch up.
When the frame that usually holds our norms and our sense of order together just cracks, quietly and without any warning.
The technical failure gave birth to a philosophical one.
Exactly. The system fractured, and what filled the void was noise. The initial state of any systemic failure is always characterized by that loss of meaning.
Which brings us to the first, and maybe the most precious, casualty in any crisis like this.
Trust. Absolutely.
You have this massive, sudden, terrifying event. What happens in that immediate information environment?
The source material, the logs and accounts from those first few hours, it paints a picture of just instant, suffocating information overload.
The chat windows.
The chat windows, general chat, trade chat, guild chat, the lifeblood of the community, they all just flooded instantly. You had advice battling rumors, you had legitimate warnings just being drowned out by sheer panic.
I imagine people rushing to seem authoritative, to offer solutions.
That's a critical part of it. People seeing the chaos and immediately trying to establish themselves as leaders, offering instructions.
So you, the average player, you're just standing there watching the world fall apart. You're getting this tidal wave of contradictory messages.
Exactly. Stay away from the cities.
No, log out immediately.
Come to this specific corner. We're setting up a quarantine.
Don't worry, it's just a hoax. It's a graphical bug.
Follow me. I know how to cure it.
It's the sound of total relational collapse, isn't it?
It is. Because none of those messages felt reliable. The entire context for reliability had just vanished.
Right. In a stable system, if a high-level player or maybe a designated city guard character gives an instruction, it has weight. It has authority.
But when the system itself, the very thing that grants that authority, is proven to be broken, well, the legitimacy of every single voice is instantly questioned.
We wait for leadership in a crisis. It's a fundamental human instinct. We expect someone to speak clearly, calmly, with an authority that's been earned.
But the people who held that authority, the developers, the game masters, they were largely silent. Or at least they were reacting too slowly from the player's perspective. They were trying to find the problem in the code.
And that silence on the official channels, it just created this vacuum.
An instantaneous, pervasive vacuum, and it exposed the fragility of leadership when it's stripped bare of its formal trappings.
Without the titles, without the uniforms, the official platforms, the very idea of who you should listen to just evaporates.
It became an anarchy, not of violence, but of authority. No one knew who to listen to because there was no recognized stable source of truth anymore.
So with no external anchor of authority to hold on to, where did millions of individual players turn in that moment of chaos?
They turned inward. They had no other choice. They listened to instinct.
And instinct in a situation like that often means fear.
Fear or a deep, sometimes destructive curiosity. Some people listened to their fear and just logged out immediately. They vanished, waiting for the system to stabilize on its own.
They opted out.
They did. Others, though, those with a higher tolerance for chaos, they remained. But they were all forced to listen only to themselves, or maybe to the small, isolated groups of friends they already trusted.
And that philosophical weight, the sheer speed with which systemic legitimacy dissolved into millions of isolated individual reactions, that should make us all deeply uncomfortable.
It should, because it reveals how profoundly thin the veneer of order really is in any large, complex society, whether it's digital or physical.
It's a terrifying observation. That single moment where the fracture of trust happened before any of the real harm, that's maybe the biggest lesson.
I agree. Chaos, as we see here, doesn't start with destruction. It starts with relational disintegration. It starts the moment we stop believing what others are telling us, and most certainly when we stop believing that the system itself is coherent.
And that relational collapse forces an ethical mirror right up to our faces. It compels us to look, really look, at who we are when the consequences suddenly feel fuzzy.
Absolutely. The rules of the game, the normal rules of engagement, they just ceased to exist. The framework shifted from what was a social contract to, well, a behavioral free-for-all.
Let's turn to that mirror then. Because leadership in this digital disaster, it wasn't defined by a guild title or a powerful position. It was defined entirely by one thing.
A single, observable metric: behavior.
When the rules stopped mattering, we saw this profound split, this dichotomy in ethical responses. It was like the community split into two opposing camps.
We saw two profoundly different ways of relating to the very idea of suffering and responsibility. The first was characterized by what the source material helps us identify as proximity to care.
Tell me more about that. Proximity to care. Who were these people?
These were the healers, and I mean that both literally and figuratively. They were the players who, despite knowing the immediate and very high probability that trying to help would kill their own avatar.
Which has real costs. Losing experience, having to repair expensive armor, losing time.
All of that. Despite knowing that, they still stepped into the infected cities. They stood there and they healed complete strangers.
That's a remarkable act of digital presence. It's the choice to be with the suffering, even when you know you can't stop the epidemic itself.
Precisely. They stood in those infected cities, which were the virtual equivalent of a biological war zone, and they cast their healing spells. They tried to mitigate the draining health bars of others.
Often futilely, I imagine.
Very often. They performed these actions, knowing they were likely futile, and they continued until their own digital presence inevitably drained away and they died too. They even set up impromptu quarantine zones outside the city gates, trying to coordinate with others through chat, warning travelers not to enter.
So they created these little pockets of micro-leadership in a world of macro chaos.
And this is the crucial part. This effort came with zero external motivation. There was no achievement unlocked. There was no rare item drop, no public recognition that the server would log.
Nothing.
Nothing. It was motivated purely by presence, by an inability to watch suffering, even pixelated suffering, and not respond. They sacrificed their own personal progression for the immediate, unrewarded well-being of the community.
They chose to maintain the relational contract, even when the structural one was completely broken.
That's a perfect way to put it.
And then, of course, we have the unsettling counterpoint, the one that received far more attention, the acts of moral distance.
Yes, the spreaders, the weaponizers, the griefers.
This is where the laboratory analogy becomes chillingly accurate, isn't it?
It really is. These were the players who saw the systemic failure and deliberately sought to exploit it. They would intentionally get infected.
And then use the game's mechanics, like expensive fast travel options, teleportation spells.
To rush into crowded, previously uninfected areas, places like the starting zones full of new players, just to watch those low-level avatars collapse en masse.
They weren't just passively letting it spread. They were actively weaponizing the chaos.
That is the key distinction. They actively chose to exploit the systemic loophole for effect. They turned the bug into a feature of mass griefing. For them, the collapse of the system wasn't a threat to the community. It was a new set of rules for a darkly entertaining social experiment.
And here's the hardest truth, I think. The one that the sources reveal that really cuts deep into how we like to see human nature. Most of these spreaders, they didn't see themselves as villains.
No. They weren't high fantasy bad guys twirling mustaches. When asked about it later, they often described their behavior as just curiosity. They were testing the limits of the new parameters.
They were detached.
Completely. They framed it as just playing the new version of the game, a version where the rules of consequence had temporarily changed. They saw the death of other players not as suffering, but as an interesting effect, a data point in a glitch environment.
That sounds dangerously close to the kind of rationalization we see in the real world.
Yeah.
It's just the economy working itself out, or I was simply acting rationally within a broken system.
It is precisely that rationalization. The systemic collapse offered a moral loophole, and they stepped right through it. They could inflict the maximum amount of harm with the absolute minimum of perceived consequence to their real-world self.
Protected by the screen.
Protected by the screen, and protected by the shared, unspoken understanding that it's just a game.
Which brings us to the core ethical question that this entire incident just reflects back to us, quietly, without accusation. It really challenges the nature of our ethics in a digital age.
It asks, quite simply, who are we, ethically, when the consequences feel fundamentally unreal?
When the veil of anonymity is thick. When no one can see our face or know our real name.
When suffering is reduced to mere pixels on a screen. Just a health bar dropping to zero. And maybe most importantly, when responsibility feels entirely optional rather than inevitable.
That distance, that emotional and moral separation you mentioned, that seems to be the essence of the harm. It wasn't about some dramatic evil malice. It was about convenient abstraction.
Yes, the abstraction allowed the harm to feel harmless. And we have to remember, this kind of moral distance isn't unique to video games.
Of course not.
It happens anytime suffering is on the other side of a screen, or across some arbitrary social or geographic line that allows us to feel detached. The game simply provided a uniquely dense, low-stakes laboratory where we could observe this detachment in real time. It highlights that a screen doesn't just display information, it often acts as a moral shield.
So if that ethical mirror shows us this duality, this proximity to care on one side and moral distance on the other, how does that redefine leadership in a moment of crisis? Because clearly, the formal systems of authority failed completely, but behavior stepped into that vacuum.
And leadership in this scenario was not about who shouted the loudest. It wasn't about who had the most powerful healing spells or the best equipment. It was profoundly, almost invisibly relational.
It was a refusal to participate in the general relational harm.
Exactly. Leadership was revealed only in that behavior. It was revealed by who stayed to warn others, even when they knew they were being ignored.
Who chose restraint.
Yes. Who chose restraint when the temptation to exploit the chaos just out of curiosity or for amusement was incredibly high. who used their own digital presence, their own character, to provide a warning rather than to inflict damage.
The source notes are clear on this. Leadership wasn't announced. It wasn't optimized for efficiency. It was barely visible.
Crises rarely reveal clean, unambiguous heroes and villains, do they? Instead, they reveal these three underlying human capacities, which became the true measures of ethical presence in that world.
And what were they?
The first, as we've discussed, was proximity to care. The second was tolerance for ambiguity. And the third, and perhaps the most important, was the capacity for silence.
Let's delve into those three elements, because
Yeah.
they fundamentally change our expectation of what effective action looks like in a crisis. Let's start with tolerance for ambiguity. What did that look like on the streets of a virtual city falling apart?
It was the ability to refrain from premature action. In the midst of panic, the natural human impulse is to achieve certainty immediately.
We want an answer now.
We want an answer. If the game is broken, we must immediately find a new rule, a new certainty, even if it's based on nothing but rumors. The tolerance for ambiguity was demonstrated by the players who were able to just stop, to observe, and to accept the critical realization that I don't know what is happening and my best action right now might be no action at all.
That is such a powerful form of leadership, just refusing to add to the noise, refusing to amplify the panic.
Exactly. They resisted the urge to fill the vacuum of certainty with what was ultimately performative noise. And this is so vital because every piece of misinformation, every conflicting instruction that was flooding those chat windows, it wasn't just confusing, it was an act of relational harm.
It actively made things worse.
It further eroded the community's shared ability to coordinate any kind of effective defense. So tolerance for ambiguity is the capacity to just sit still while the very meaning of the world is shifting under your feet.
And the second point, proximity to care, we've touched on this, but how does it operate as a quiet form of leadership?
Proximity to care is the anti-distance. It's the active refusal to abstract suffering into just pixels on a screen. As a leadership trait, it requires presence.
Being there.
Being there. The healers who sacrificed their avatars were exercising leadership by maintaining an ethical standard for the entire community. They demonstrated that even when the systems fail, the moral contract to try and minimize harm remains. They showed that leadership is relational. It often means being in the place where the suffering is greatest, even if all you can offer is small, palliative comfort.
It's about bearing witness, not just about fixing the problem.
That's it. You bear witness. Which brings us to the third and maybe the most counterintuitive element, capacity for silence.
This feels like the most difficult one.
It is. This is the quiet epicenter of ethical leadership during a systemic failure. We so often equate silence with weakness or inaction, particularly in Western models of leadership that prioritize broadcasting and loud decisiveness.
Right. The person in charge is supposed to be the one talking.
But in moments of overwhelming uncertainty, silence is the space where reflection happens. It's the necessary pause before wise action can occur.
The rush for certainty, that need to shout an answer, any answer. It feels like action, but it often just escalates the crisis.
It does. The critical insight here, the one the source material really points to, is that in moments of genuine systemic uncertainty, silence paired with care is often the most ethical response available.
The real leaders in this digital mirror were the ones who slowed down instead of shouting.
Who listened instead of broadcasting, who made the conscious choice not to weaponize the pervasive uncertainty that everyone was feeling. They understood, perhaps intuitively, that the greatest damage being done wasn't to health bars, but was relational. It was the fracturing of trust.
And silence was the only antidote to the noise that was causing that fracture.
It's fascinating, isn't it, that scientists and epidemiologists later studied this event. They used it as a rare glimpse into uncontrolled behavioral spread.
It was a perfect, contained model of an epidemic, a perfect lab.
They had access to millions of data points on movement, communication, decision-making under stress, a kind of experiment that no real-world ethical structure would ever allow.
And yet, for most people who were actually there, and for the broader public, it was just shrugged off.
Just a game glitch. An interesting little anecdote, but something that didn't count because it wasn't real life.
And then, years later, the real world mirrored it almost perfectly, didn't it? The source material makes this explicit connection.
The mirroring was uncanny, complete. In subsequent public health emergencies, we saw the exact same patterns emerge. The sudden panic, the overwhelming flood of conflicting information from every direction, the performative certainty from self-proclaimed experts on social media.
And the collapse of trust in official sources.
Yes, and against that chaotic backdrop, you saw the same two behaviors. You saw the quiet acts of care, the genuine proximity that never made the headlines, the neighbors checking on each other, the frontline workers just showing up.
And you saw the opportunistic spreaders.
The ones who exploited the fear and the uncertainty for profit, for attention, or just for a perverse sense of amusement. The people spreading rumors and misinformation.
The ultimate irony being that many of them believed they were acting rationally. I'm just gathering resources, I'm looking out for myself, I'm sharing what I heard.
But their individual rationality contributed to a collective insanity. And that leads us back to the critical failure point in both the digital world and the real one. Disconnection.
The failure isn't intellectual. It's not about a lack of information.
It's existential. The source argues that most failures in a crisis are not caused by ignorance. We usually have enough data. They're caused by the inability or perhaps the unwillingness to remain present when clarity is unavailable.
We hate that space of not knowing. We despise it. So we rush to fill it with noise.
We want certainty now. And when certainty doesn't arrive instantly from some trusted authority, we fill that uncomfortable, ambiguous silence with our own noise. We mistake noise for action. We fear that silence equals weakness when in fact the most courageous act is often to wait, to observe, and to choose restraint.
The digital plague in that fantasy world, it ended. The servers were reset by the developers.
A hard reset. They patched the code, the health bars stabilized, the digital skeletons were cleared away, and the cities repopulated. Life went on, cleaner than before.
A clean ending for a digital problem.
But the pattern did not end. It merely went dormant. It waits, coiled, for the next systemic failure, the next global uncertainty, the next moment when no voice feels trustworthy and every message is competing for our attention.
This pattern is woven into the human response to uncertainty. We carry it with us, from a high fantasy realm to the global financial markets to our own neighborhoods.
Which brings us to the profound test that awaits all of us, always. It's the moment when we are asked, again, not what we know, not what resources we have gathered.
But fundamentally, who are we when knowing is impossible?
The systems and the rules will fail again. They always do, eventually. Our true preparedness for the next crisis isn't technical. It's not about having a better plan. It's ethical.
It's relational, it's behavioral.
Yes.
So as a companion question for you, something to carry quietly with you, not as a challenge, but for ongoing, unhurried reflection. We want to leave you with this idea drawn from the deepest part of this story.
What kind of leader are you when no one is watching?
When the system is broken and there is no achievement to unlock, no reward to be gained.
Think about that moment. When the system offers loopholes instead of guidance, when no rule is being enforced, when silence is so much easier than care, and choosing restraint costs you attention. It costs you that momentary rush of feeling decisive or knowledgeable.
What do? Do you stay in the afflicted area, offering that proximity to care, even if you know it's futile? Do you warn others, even if you know you'll probably be ignored?
Or do you step back and observe, exercising that tolerance for ambiguity? Do you amplify the fear to gain some momentary social or digital advantage? Or do you just disappear, deciding that it's not your problem to solve?
There is no scoreboard for these moments. There's no applause from the other players, no formal recognition that you did the right thing.
These choices happen in the space between action and inaction. In the quiet hesitation before you click send on that rumor or before you type that angry comment.
We must understand, and this is the critical takeaway, that these are the moments that truly shape our cultures. These small, unrecorded choices under pressure. They matter long before any policy is written or any official statement is released.
This entire event was not a lesson taught by a game or by its developers. It was a mirror. A mirror we accidentally walked into when the system failed. And we are still standing in front of that mirror today, waiting to see if the reflection will change.
The choice lies in recognizing ourselves in that reflection quickly enough, the next time the chaos descends, to choose differently. To prioritize presence and restraint and care over noise and distance.
Perhaps you can carry that concept with you this week. The capacity for silence, not as an emptiness, but as a deliberate choice. A choice for presence and for reflection.
Thank you for engaging in this deep dive with us. We will be here when you are ready to continue the conversation.
Until next time.